Welcome to Inside View. I'm Dana Nichols, editor of the Calaveras Enterprise, and I'm your host today. And I am very pleased to have Sheriff Rick Dibasilio with us. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. You've served Calaveras County in law enforcement for 14 years. You were named sheriff in May, coming fast on the heels of the Butte fire and the advent of a very massive medical marijuana industry. And you're coping with all that as best you can with the resources you have. And we're going to be talking a lot about those resources and what you believe we should do to properly manage this situation. So first of all, I want to talk about Measure D. You've made it no secret that Measure D, which is on the November ballot, is a measure you oppose. And I'd like to just know, kind of hit the high points first, and then we'll get into some of the messy details. But hit the high points of why you think this is a bad idea.
Well, it doesn't give me the opportunity to do background checks on anybody other than the registrant. And what we're finding right now is that the registrants are like an absentee landlord. You never see them. When we're going to these sites to do registration checks, we don't know who the registrant is because they're not there. And it makes it very difficult because we don't know, my officers don't know who they're dealing with when they get to these sites. So that's my biggest priority. And I hear a lot of people, concerned as why I need to know who's working on the sites. Well,
sure.
The issue with that is that, they compare it to the grape fields and the tomato fields and all that, but those industries, they don't carry guns. And in this industry, a lot, and I'm not saying all, but a lot of these folks that are dealing with marijuana are carrying guns. So I don't want to send my officers, code compliance, environmental health, or any of these folks onto a site where there's a potential for somebody to be carrying guns.
Okay. I do have to ask, because this is a county where very many of the residents believe in the Second Amendment and have always had firearms. There's many hunters here. You've always had to go to properties where there were guns, right?
Correct, and I'm a huge proponent of the Second Amendment right, and I'm very strongly enforce that.
Of course.
The difference is that when you go to a piece of property to talk to someone, they're typically not walking around with their guns.
Okay.
And these people are there to protect their product because they're either illegal, the grow is an illegal grow, or they just don't want people stealing it. And I understand their concern because of the value of the product, but I still don't want my people and county personnel going to these sites and having to deal with folks that are carrying guns.
Yeah.
It's a danger. It's a huge danger.
So thus you would like to have the ability to background check those who are actually present,
absolutely,
operating the site and know who you're dealing with.
Right. Well, here's the issue, Dana, is that if they hire somebody who is a convicted felon who can't legally have a gun, but yet they're working on a grow site and they have a gun, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So knowing who's working on the site, it's not going to preclude them from getting their license to grow. It just precludes that person from being able to work on that site if he's going to carry a gun.
Right.
That's the whole issue.
So as it is written, Measure D only allows background checks on the registrants.
Correct.
And then what proponents would say is, of course, it's inevitable that any measure might miss something, and that there are other avenues that the Board of Supervisors could give you the power to do background checks. For example, they could do an ordinance for the business license and say that if you get a business license, then you have to have background checks on anybody who's present working on your site. What do you think of that? Is that a reasonable idea?
If they're able to do that, my understanding, and again, I'm not an attorney by any means, my understanding is that they can't add to an ordinance. Can they make a separate ordinance, which is what it sounds like?
Ordinance, right.
That's a possibility. I don't know. I don't know if they can do that or not.
Right, because even no matter what passes, you depend on the Board of Supervisors to adjust to changing circumstances and give you what you need. Absolutely.
As we talked off camera, no matter what happens, and it all falls back to what the citizens want to do or what the Board of Supervisors wants to do, my job is to protect the community of Calaveras County. And the laws that they put in place are what I'm going to enforce.
Right. So if at the moment you are part of the enforcement team for the urgency ordinance.
Correct.
Which is supposedly a temporary measure because it can't go on forever.
Right.
And the Board of Supervisors enacted that in May, same month that you were appointed.
Yeah, 7 days after.
7 days after. And so we're under the urgency ordinance, and then we have Measure D on the ballot. And if Measure D is approved by the voters, then Measure D would become the ordinance regulating the marijuana industry.
Correct. That's going to supersede whatever.
So I'd like you to kind of compare the two. If you have to live with one or the other indefinitely, which of the two do you prefer, I guess would be what I would like to ask.
That's a loaded question because I don't like either one of them.
Okay.
The urgency ordinance gives me more ability to do background checks more thoroughly because it allows me to check for and deny people for serious misdemeanors.
Okay.
Measure D does not.
Okay.
So there are some things, both the ordinance, and I've talked about this before in town hall meetings, that an ordinance, if that's again what the citizens wants to do, an ordinance to be put into place that allows me and environmental health and planning and co-compliance to have input into the ordinance so that we cover all of our bases. Mm-hmm. There are other counties out there that are putting these ordinances together. We need to plagiarize all of them and find what works for us, for the county.
Right. So then the hope is that you would rather see a process, if we're going to have regulated marijuana, to do a new ordinance where you have more input.
Absolutely. And that could come in February if Measure D does not pass. In February, the board has the ability to continue the urgency ordinance, and at that point, they would have a year to get a final ordinance in place.
And nobody knows what's going to happen because we have an election.
Oh, yeah.
We have proponents of a ban gathering signatures. There could be a measure to ban marijuana production. Do you ever worry that you'll get some combination of things that is unmanageable, like you'll get a ban but no funding to enforce it, or that you'll get an ordinance but not the changes you need? I mean, I guess what do you fear the most? What do you think is going to be the least manageable situation?
Well, I don't think that marijuana has a huge factor in the budget for the sheriff's office because, and I've been talking about this for quite a while, that the sheriff's office has been underfunded for years. Mm-hmm. This goes back to, before the 2008, that we were underfunded there, even then. The board needs to get the priorities to know that the sheriff's department has to be funded. And even if we went back, what I was talking about offline, even if we went back to the 2002 timeframe where I had 60 officers, we were still short. To cover the large area that we have to cover in this county, that's not enough officers. And I want people to understand it's not 60 officers on the street. There are grants that we have to cover. We have detectives. We have a narcotics unit. We have courts that we have to cover. So there's an array of areas that the deputies have to cover. So that number of 60 is not a large number by any means. So the board needs to fund the sheriff's department so that we can do our jobs for the citizens. The bottom line is the board and myself are constitutional officers. Our first priority is to protect the citizens of this county. Mm-hmm. And in order for me to do my job, they have to do their job, and that is to give me the people, the funds, so that I can hire the people to keep them and to keep them here.
Of course, they're dealing with whatever the economy is that they get.
I understand that.
And that's, I think, part of the frustration here is the economy's been, I guess at best you could say, stagnant for a while. It's not bounced back.
No.
To some extent there's some improvement in jobs, but it's not what it was a decade ago.
I moved here in 1978, Dana, and San Andreas was a ghost town then and it's still a ghost town. There's no infrastructure in this county. Back when I was a kid, we thought the county was 5 to 10 years behind. Well, they were all of 10 years behind back then, and now we're probably 20 years behind economically. We have no infrastructure here. When I was a kid, we had the logging industry going on here. We had the mill down in Wallace. We had the mill in Toyon. We had the cement plant. All those things are gone, and nothing is coming in. We are so far off the beaten path and Highway 99 being the beaten path, that I don't see a lot of companies wanting to come up here because we're so far off of the beaten path. It's going to cost them so much money for transportation. I was in the transportation industry when I did hazardous waste. It's expensive to run those trucks. So I don't know what we can do, what the county can do to entice people to come to this county. Amador County and Tuolumne County have flourished for foothill communities, and we have not.
I've been looking at some employment statistics, and interestingly, Amador and Tuolumne haven't bounced back as much toward the 2008, 2007 employment levels as we have. I don't know why that is, but they're actually still down more jobs than we are. And ours have shifted. There's less in construction, a lot less in construction, and it's more retail. And healthcare increased. That's one of the few areas that increased.
In our county?
In our county.
Okay.
So
how many people are traveling out of our county to go to work?
Lots.
Yeah.
Lots of them. And the larger economy hasn't been as robust as it was a decade ago either.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, I'm not making excuses for the supervisors,
I know.
but if it was easy, I think they would give you, I think you're beloved by the Board of Supervisors. Generally, the supervisors want to give law enforcement what it needs. I don't think that they're anti-law enforcement. I think that they have a huge struggle to give you what you need. I don't think it's simple.
And I agree, but they still have to make it a priority. It has to be a priority. And when you go back down to 2009, 10, 11, and 12, they cut all county departments a 17%, actually it was 17.5, a 3 and a 3. They cut 40% out of the sheriff's budget. And I'll tell you, they did cut the other departments, but you don't cut public safety that much. We had to lay people off. And even in the crunch of 2008, 9, 10, 11, there was not very many departments that were laying cops off. Stockton had their issue, but Stockton has other issues. But when you have to lay off a cop, there's a problem. You need to reassess. The fact that we had some Board of Supervisors back that wanted to have nothing against libraries, trust me, I have nothing against animal shelters, but when you would rather save a library and animal shelters as opposed to your public safety, that's not the right priority in my eyes. And maybe I'm biased because I'm in law enforcement, but public safety has to be number one.
Have you changed your position at all in the last 2 weeks on the extent to which you support the board's decision to go with the urgency ordinance and to regulate medical marijuana? And I ask partly because of the comment that really marijuana has no place in Calaveras County. So is your position the same, or have you evolved somewhat on that urgency ordinance?
Well, let me clarify. When I say marijuana has no place in this county, I'm talking about commercial marijuana.
Okay.
Medicinal, I have no issue with. If people need their medicine, they need their medicine. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if it has the medicinal purposes. And for the people that say it works for them, I'm not in their pain, so I can't make that call. But commercial marijuana, I still believe should not be in the county. But the bottom line is, it goes back to, I'm here to do a job, and if the board says they're going to put an emergency ordinance, and I said that on the 10th when we went through that process, that I would rather see a ban of commercial marijuana. That hasn't changed. If the board chooses to put something in place, my job is to enforce that. If the citizens of this county want to put something in place, I will enforce that.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. That is my job as a sheriff.
So the estimates by some county officials are that if we have this commercial industry here and we tax it, and you do favor the taxation if we're going to have the industry, right?
I go back to what I said earlier.
Right.
I favor the county giving the sheriff's department the funds so that I can do my job.
Right.
Whether it's a tax on the marijuana, whether it's a tax down the road, a public safety tax, like they're doing Measure B down in the Burson Wallace area for the fire department, like they did up at Ebbets Pass Gas. I have to have the money so that I can fund our department so that I can keep the citizens of this county safe.
All right. Do you support a ban?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on how to do that? I mean, obviously we can ban it, But if we ban it, we need to give you, what would it take? Do you have a sense of the scope of what you would need to actually eradicate marijuana? I mean, it sounds like a big job.
Well, okay, if you look at a ban, marijuana was illegal before the urgency ordinance came into play, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And we were dealing with it as best we could.
Recreational marijuana is illegal, but the medical stuff has been legal
right, the
since
medical stuff is
1996.
96, right. But marijuana as a whole, other than, how do you want to put that? Non-medicinal marijuana has always been illegal. And we have been dealing with that for years. And yes, it has been here for years, but we've been dealing with it. So we have an ordinance in place now that says that it's legal. If it goes back to being a ban, it still is illegal. And I believe that if they do end up banning, if that's what the citizens want to do, if that's what the board wants to do, then a lot of these folks are going to leave because it's illegal. There are still other counties out there that, Humboldt County, you can still grow. So they can go back to where they came from. I'm going to say 75% of the people that are here came in after the fact. They weren't folks that were living here. You mean
after the fire or after the...
After October of 2015 when the martial law got passed by Governor Brown. I think that's when people started coming up here because we didn't have anything in place. And people gambled that they were going to be able to grow up here because it sounds like, and I don't know this for a fact, but it sounds like the word on the street was Calaveras County's not going to ban it. Well, if you're not going to ban it, people are coming into town. That young man, Kaz, from the CCA, stated he was in Humboldt and he knew that Calaveras wasn't going to ban it. So he came from Humboldt to here to start growing. So most of these folks, a good portion of them, have come in after the fact.
Does it ever strike you as odd that for years the economic development people said we need to have some way for young people to come here and start businesses, and then we get it and it's not what we expected or specifically asked for?
Oh, well, I think that the way that it's come about, it's the old proverbial, the cart got put in front of the horse. Had we taken a step back and said, like the other counties in the state, most of the counties in the state have said we're going to ban it. And as you see now, if you go online, you can look, Placer County, Yolo County, Monterey County, Siskiyou County, Humboldt County, they are putting together some regulations. So had we had done that, it may have averted some of what's going on right now. I don't know.
Yeah, if we'd been
the fire may have changed all that too. I don't know. Nobody can predict that. I don't have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen in the future. But I still say that where we're at now is, as far as commercial marijuana growers, is way different than what it was before. Because people had Prop 215, they were able to grow 99 plants. Was some of that going out of county? Were they selling it? Absolutely. But we didn't have the influx that we have right now.
Okay. You'll need to work, no matter what combination of ordinances you get, you'll have to work with the Board of Supervisors. So if Measure D passes, or even before Measure D passes or doesn't pass, I mean, you could ask for changes. Are there already changes that you're working on with the board? Have you made any proposals to them for ordinances that can give you the tools you need?
Not as far as ordinances, no. I mean, I have talked to them about what I want to see in an ordinance.
Okay.
But I have not sat down with them and said, to help them build an ordinance. That's county council's job. It's my job to give them my input, because you got to remember, you have the sheriff's department that has to have input. Environmental compliance is huge. Code compliance is huge. Everybody needs to have some input on whatever ordinance gets put into place if it's going to be done by the board.
Well, I ask because if the background check is already, it sounds like an issue, that you're showing up, there's people that are not on the registry form working in these gardens, you'd like to background check them, why not do some single little ordinance sooner to address that and just take care of it so that it doesn't matter, so that you're no longer dependent on whether Measure D passes? You can basically get what you want.
I got to go back to, I've talked to county council about that, and they said that they can't.
Oh, really?
And again, I don't know if they have looked at the avenue of
Requiring it for a business.
Requiring it
license.
for a business, right. I don't know if they've done that or not.
Okay.
I've given that information to county council. What they do with it is on them.
Okay, gotcha. Tell me, let's go through all the Board of Supervisor members, and I believe that Dennis Mills probably supports your views on the approach to marijuana, that if we're going to have it, regulate it, but that really he'd prefer a ban, like you'd prefer a ban.
That's a question you'd have to ask
Dennis.
Mr. Mills.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer for somebody else.
Well, I've heard him say that. That's why I ask.
I know he's a proponent of a ban. That I do know.
What's your sense of the support you have on the Board of Supervisors as it exists, and the support you might have with the people who could be on the board after the election? In other words, do you think you're going to be able to get what you want regardless of whether Measure D passes?
The current board and the potential board members that we know for sure that are coming on, Jack Garamendi and Dennis Mills, are very supportive of the sheriff's office. I think they'll do everything that they can to get me what I need to do the job that I need to do.
Okay.
I don't know, and as far as Cliff goes, I know Cliff is in that same boat, as is Gary Toffanelli, very supportive of the Sheriff's Department. I've talked to Bob Bowermans. He's very supportive. David Tuno is very supportive. The other two folks I have not talked to.
And just to clarify, Tuno and Bowerman are candidates in District 5 in the event that Supervisor Kearney is recalled, then they're on the list of potential supervisors in that event.
Correct.
Okay. Because you could have, all you really are assured is Michael Oliveira, Dennis Mills, and Jack Garamendi. So 2 seats could change.
Correct. We could have 4 new board members come January.
Okay. But you're confident that you're still going to probably get what you need, because it sounds like you've got a majority that you know them, you believe they understand what you need.
I don't know if I'm going to get what I need. I know that they understand our dilemma, and that they are going to work to get me what I need. Whether that comes to fruition or not, I don't know. It's all going to depend on the budget and where they can find the money to do what needs to be done.
Let's go on to this. I wanted just to wave this around so that people can see how this is Measure D. It's, I think, 32 pages. It's a fairly large document. You've read through it.
I have.
And there's a whole lot of specific stuff in here about where your fence can be, how big the farms can be. Is some of that useful?
Yeah, a lot of that is in the emergency ordinance, but there's a lot that is not in the emergency ordinance. There's been a lot added to this by the proponents of Measure D, where they're going to allow commercial grows in the M1, M2, and M4 zones.
And just to clarify, M1, M2, M4
those are manufacturing zones.
Manufacturing zones, okay.
And again, from a law enforcement standpoint, that's going to open up the doors to allowing marijuana being grown in areas that I don't believe that they should be. So there's a lot of changes in there. There is a lot of what is in the urgency ordinance, but there's still a lot that's missing. Okay. And there's additions. The urgency ordinance is half that thick.
Okay. Why not industrial land? What's problematic about that?
The manufacturing areas?
Yeah, the manufacturing part.
Location partially. M2 is the old airport right outside of San Andreas.
Okay.
That's considered M2. That's manufacturing areas. They're big warehouses. Not only would they be able to grow within that warehouse, they would be able to have a dispensary storefront in that warehouse also. We have 3 dispensaries in the county. To me, that's sufficient. People can get their medicine from them. So you're adding more to it. The Toyon area over by the school is also zoned M2, I believe it is. And the problem with that is that if you read this ordinance, they could technically put an indoor grow. Remember the old building right there on the corner of Toyon's place, I guess is on Highway 26, the old carpet place?
Yeah, I remember the guy applied for
Right, they tried to
have a dispensary there.
That's right. But under this ordinance, if they use that big warehouse out in the back that is part of that property, because it's within four walls and it's not viewable from the public, they could have a dispensary in there and they could have a marijuana grow there. And the 1,000-foot zone to keep it out of the school areas does not apply according to this ordinance. So that's going to allow somebody to put it there, and it's obviously that they've already tried to put something there. And you have the bus barn right there for the school. Kids are in and out of there all the time. And then Toy Island Middle School is across the highway.
Okay.
So there are some issues with this.
Yeah. You go on these visits. Tell me a little bit about what it's like actually visiting. Have you personally gone on some of these visits to the farms to see what's going on?
I've been to a couple of them.
What are you seeing?
Some of them are out of compliance because their areas are too big. I was at one where they had a travel trailer, and this is up in the burn area, so they can have a travel trailer there. But according to the urgency ordinance, it has to be hooked up to septic, has to be hooked up to legitimate power, and it has to be hooked up to power,
water, and sewer?
And water, thank you.
Has to have a water source.
Right. Well, they have a legitimate water source, and they have power, which they can have on a generator, which is okay by code, but there's no septic system up there. So the trailer gets full, and they're dumping raw sewage on the ground. I was there, I saw it. There's raw sewage on the ground.
Yep.
And the emergency ordinance says that they have to have a septic system.
Yep.
This ordinance, Measure D, allows them to have an RV, which is a storage tank. Well, we already have that, and they're not complying. So they're dumping raw sewage on the ground. It's an environmental hazard. It's a health hazard.
Yeah.
There's garbage. They're using their pesticides, and their bags and stuff are laying all over the ground. They're not policing themselves.
So it basically, because it's a garden, you're going to catch it, whereas some of the other residents who don't have gardens may kind of fly under the radar on some of these things. Because I think I've had to go out in the fire area, and there's a lot of people living in vehicles that don't probably meet code.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the other thing. The Board of Supervisors at our meeting on the 10th said that they were going to allow, originally they had a mile radius outside the fire to live in a travel trailer.
Yep.
I got them to narrow that down to a quarter of a mile. This breaks it back out to a mile.
Yeah. We're almost out of time here.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. Any last
Absolutely.
2 sentences you want to say to the public before we finish up?
The ball is in your court. It's up to the citizens and the Board of Supervisors at this point. The Sheriff's Department needs funding, again, not because of marijuana, but because we've been so short-staffed for so long. And I think if we have the funding and the staffing levels up to where we want, we can do the job that we need to do for this county.
Thank you for coming, Rick.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the time.